I'm Joseph. I'm the president of ReproConnect. You probably all talked to me on the phone at one time or another, but this is cool to actually do something in person. We're just going to see how this goes. Kind of an experiment this first year. If it goes well, if you guys really feel like it was valuable, we might ramp it up and really make a much bigger push next year. We're frequently asked by our reprographers, who often are kind of in their own little bubble, running their business and doing what they do, what are you seeing around the industry, right? What are you seeing other shops do? What's working? What's not working? What are the trends? What's coming online? With that, we're going to start with kind of some of the trends and opportunities that we've been seeing in the reprographics industry, especially over the last few years. If we rewind the clock, though, let's go back 10 years. I don't have to tell you just how bad it was and what a rough ride it's been over the last decade, right? We all know what happened back in 2008, 2009, and what happened after that, how much the landscape has changed since then. There were a lot of Chicken Little people saying sky's falling, right? A lot of people who really thought repro was not going to survive. And many repro shops haven't. I don't know exactly the right number, but I've read a few estimates. ARC, I remember, estimated that the repro industry was cut by 2/3. That back in 2007, there were about 3,000 shops, and now there's less than 1,000. I've heard other people estimate it cut it in half. Either way, it's been a bloodbath, particularly in those years after the initial recession. Side note, though, our clients have done extremely well in that particular area. I went back and reviewed our list of reprographers that we were working with in 2009, and 90% of them are still in business. So for a market that was otherwise cut in half or 2/3, somewhere in there, clients that we worked with have done incredibly well. And I'm not sure that was our doing. Maybe they were already the kind of clients and were more forward thinking, and that's why we were working with them. I'm not saying that we caused that, but the correlation was nevertheless really encouraging and exciting to see. Going back to this, though, one of the things that I remember very distinctly in 2009, I used to work with a KIP dealer, a very large KIP dealer that will remain nameless, that told me back in 2009 straight up, repro's done. And he was a massive dealer to repro firms. That was his business, right? And he pretty much said, Joseph, get out. If you build a software business on this industry, you've got nowhere to go. He says there might be a little bit of a comeback, a little bit of a last gasp after the construction market comes back. He says, but within the next 3 to 5 years, he says there's just going to be a few stragglers out there, maybe one big nationwide repro firm that's shipping plans all over. There's just no future in this market. Whoa. Thankfully, I did not heed his advice. And as I mentioned, there's been a lot more resilience, I think, than a lot of people expected back then. That's not to say that there still haven't been incredible challenges. Just some of the things we constantly hear people talking about. You know, back in 2006, everyone controlled distribution. That's just a hard thing to get anymore. So many planning alternatives popping up. Printing is just a commodity. So many free options. Things like, I used to compete with a reprographer across town. Now I feel like I'm competing with Dropbox, right? Just a totally different landscape. And it's been cool for us to still see, though, the resilience and the survival of a lot of our reprographers that we work with. And while this is all doom and gloom, in some respects, a rebound that has now even taken shape of some incredible growth opportunities. And so that's what I want to talk about next. Given this history, it's amazing to me that we're all in this room and there's all these people here in town doing pro. But beyond that, it's even more amazing to me that we have some reprographers, quite a few reprographers now, that are doing as good, if not better, than they were back in 2009. And I want to show you some of the things that they're doing and some of the ways that that's working. The basis for the numbers I'm going to show you and some of the stats and graphs that we're going to be looking at is coming from, just so you kind of have an idea of the slice of the industry that we're looking at. We're working with just over 220 reprographers that use the plan room. We have more print shops than that don't fully use the plan room. They just use a file upload component or something, and we're not counting them. So this is a conservative number of reprographers that actually make use of the plan room as a platform. Again, I don't know exactly the size of industry, but I've heard any estimates, most estimates today are in the 700 to 1,000 range, which means we're looking at maybe a quarter, maybe even a third of the industry through that ReproConnect lens. I don't know if all our numbers are going to represent the rest of the industry, but it's a pretty good sample size, I think. That plus the fact that we are now our clients are putting over 26,000 construction projects up a year. That's been steadily increasing over the past few years. And that's, again, I think a pretty good sample size of what's going on out there. The stats, in fact, let me shift over here. The stats that we're going to be looking at are primarily from 2013 to 2019. The reason is that seemed to be when things started to stabilize after the recession, right? 2013 still wasn't a great year, but things started coming back then. And so that was sort of the 6-year period we want to look at in terms of what's been going on. And the main index that we want to look at, or at least the first one, is the top level just plan room revenue index. This is what we've been seeing with our reprographers over the past year. Now, this is an index, and it's really small and hard to read, isn't it? This is showing rate of change year over year, right? You weren't at 0 in 2013, but we used that as a starting point. So 2014 was down 5%, 7%. Interestingly, to see overall with plan room usage that there's been a revenue rebound in the last 3 years, a particularly big one this year. I mean, surprisingly big. I was running some of these numbers. Usually we don't run a lot of these numbers till the end of the year. I was doing it early, but preparing for this talk. And in some respects, I had to go back and double and triple check. That almost seemed too good in a respect. Now, the bad news is that actually is not coming mostly from print. In fact, this is the print revenue index specifically. When we look at the plan room print orders, yeah, there's a flattening off, and I think that's what some of you even just indicated, but it's not rebounded like the overall revenue has. So for the first 3 years that we looked at, or 4 years, we're looking at, yeah, just a constant decline. Every year, fewer print orders are being placed on the plan room. And again, the last 3 years, though, has largely flattened out and rebounded a little bit this year over last year, almost made out the difference. So not terrible, particularly if your view is that over the long term, print is still on a very slow decline. Again, talking about construction printing. The rise of digital is not going to stop anytime soon. No one's expecting that repro is going to make people multimillionaires and be booming and booming and booming again. I'm not trying to paint too rosy of a picture here. But if construction printing is still on a slow decline, I'm pretty happy with the flattening out of the last 3 years. That's encouraging in of itself. So where was the revenue growth coming from? And I think you know what's going to happen next. This has been really cool to see. Since 2013, again, just using that as a starting point for the purposes of our index, download revenue was not at 0 in 2013. This is just rate of change. There has been an almost constant increasing rate of growth. Not only is it growing, but the rate of growth has been consistently going up and up, almost, for people who are really selling electronic files on their plan room. Now, I usually get two very, very different responses to that point. We mention it to people at the reception sometimes, we're vendors at the RSA and whatnot. And some people look at me and go, okay, that makes sense. And other people just laugh in my face and say, that's impossible. No one pays for a PDF file. No one can sell downloads. You can't do that. Not in my market, not with my customers. I'm just showing what we see. These are actual credit card receipts flowing through the plan room that are growing off the charts. And it's really neat to see. In fact, if you accumulate this index, this is one area of a lot of our reprographers, and this is averaged across all 220 reprographers. There's been a tripling of download revenue since 2013. If you put aside your color and small format and whatever else you do in your shops and just think about repro, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that's tripled since 2013. This is really encouraging, it's exciting, and if this is not something that you're currently doing very much of, I think it's something to think very hard about. It seems to be a bullet train, as you just saw in the last graph, that's not even slowing down, only growing faster. In fact, as a percent of total revenue, and this is comparing downloads with print orders on the plan room, the share of downloads back in 2013 was well under 20%, which is a small piece. Some people were making a few downloads here and there. It's now almost half. We're over 40% this year. That's staggering to me. Within the next year or two, our plan rooms, by and large, are going to be generating more revenue from downloads than they are from direct print orders on the plan room. I mean, printing it's declined over the last 6 years, stabilized in the last 3. It's not going away. It still might be on a slow decline. I'm going to probably try to avoid being a prognosticator about the next 10 years, but certainly seems to be a downward trend. And I don't hear anybody saying our black and white in our industry is just going to keep going up. That said, I would still disagree with, again, the Chicken Little sky is falling types, because they thought this was going to happen a decade ago. And we're not printing a whole lot lower than we were a decade ago, according to at least our Planium sales numbers. So that's been encouraging. And who was it? I don't remember who said this. Someone said we're going to have a paperless bathroom before we have a paperless job site. So no one's suggesting that paper is truly going to disappear. You know, you might be able to do more estimating without paper. You can do a lot more collaboration without paper. But at some point, that plumber on the 4th floor, that skyrise, needs a roll of paper because he's not working off an iPad. So if we get back to what we were looking at here in terms of our share between print revenue and download revenue, I'm going to move off the download revenue here in a second, but I just want to emphasize that this is definitely one of those trends that seems to still be picking up speed. And we can talk more about how people are doing it, right? You can't just go out and start charging when one downloads. There's a sales process. There's a value proposition to make. There's a way to lead a customer to the point where that's in their best interest and not something you're just forcing down their throat, because that's not going to work out well for you. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. But the bottom line is people are doing it differently, but it's something you want to take very, very, very seriously, because it's an opportunity. It's the only area that we're seeing in Repro that is growing at such an incredible speed. I mean, almost 40% this year is just, that's incredible. We have a few reprographers that are now making more already over their whole company overall. They're making a higher profit on downloads than they are on their print orders, on their Repro print orders. Now, their gross numbers, of course, on Repro is higher. And that's the other thing that this chart still doesn't even tell you. This chart says our gross download numbers this year are over 40% compared of the total revenue. I think that's an easy guess to say the profit's already higher for most Planium customers, or for many Planium customers, because that's nearly 100% profit, whatever that number is. Yep.
Joe, do you have clients who don't charge for downloads?
Plenty. Mm-hmm. You know, I think the dividing line comes down to this. This is the related trend that we're seeing that I think links up very closely with what we're seeing in the download arena. Reprographers that are still primarily serving general contractors are rarely able to get much in terms of downloads. There are exceptions. There's a couple sitting in this room that I happen to know. But by and large, I think we know GCs are cheap. GCs don't want to pay for much. GCs compete with other GCs. You start charging for downloads, their subs pitch a big fit. The GC often feels like he has to cave in order to keep his subs happy. It's a difficult situation to be in, and it's hard to get a private sector project with a GC running it to authorize you to charge his subs for downloads, when he knows he could just send out a Dropbox links via email. And when that's what you're up against, it's a hard pitch. People are getting it. We have a few customers charging for downloads when they're getting projects from private GCs, but the vast majority of download revenue is coming from clients that have worked farther up the food chain to the owner, specifically public entities. This is another one of those charts that to me is quite staggering. This is not an index. These are actual numbers, right? It's a percentage, but these are actual representation of, and we went back a full 10 years for this one, how many projects out of those 26,000 a year roughly are private sector versus public sector. This is a conservative estimate. We don't have a checkbox in the control center where you can say this is public sector versus private sector, right? So the only way we can even estimate was to build a big list of keywords, city of, town of, waterworks, school district, that kind of a thing, which means these numbers are probably low. There's probably more public sector projects that we didn't catch. But when we just ran a high-level overview of what percentage of projects posted over an entire Planium nationwide, we're seeing almost half now are coming from the public sector. It seems to be there's a lot more profit in that area. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is, but I think that links up very closely with how people are charging for downloads and with what kinds of clients are they charging for downloads. Now, we did look a little bit at the performance distribution. 10 years ago, if I had sort of sketched out, here are the high-performing clients doing really well with the Planium, and here's the low-performing clients, and here's everyone else, it ends up being a bell curve. You guys know what I'm talking about. I didn't put it on the slide, but you know what a standard bell curve looks like and how you can usually chart performance on something like that. And 10, 15 years ago, it was pretty even bell curve, The last few years, or at least within the last 10 years, there has really become a big gulf. And that's one of the reasons we want to get there and talk with a lot more reprographers. We have a segment of our client base that are blowing the doors off, right? Growing by leaps and bounds. And then we have the bulk of our clients, and I'm talking like a 30-70% that are really struggling. And what we're trying to do, obviously without sharing trade secrets or anything too specific, but just on a general trend, is get a little bit more information sharing to that other 70%. In fact, it's even more than 30-70 if we look at it this way. When we look at our planning numbers, top 10% performing reprographers that we work with, out of those 220, are capturing over 50% of the print revenue coming off the planning room, and a whopping 73% of the download revenue. That's a lot. What we've basically seen is once a shop figures out how to unlock that download revenue and get on that train, they take off and they do incredible things. And the other guys in the same town, serving the same types of clients, the same similar type shop, just hasn't quite figured out how to sell it, quite how to pitch it, hasn't quite figured out a model that works for them. And we'll see two shops in the same market, 2 miles down the street from each other, with very similar makeup, just performing night and day difference when it comes to download revenue. In fact, we decided, okay, let's start talking to these top performing clients. Let's try to figure out what the common aspects are. Again, without going into details of their secrets, because I don't think that's really what it is. What is it that makes these top 10% do sometimes 5, 10, 20 times better than the other shop in the same town? Is it obviously market? Well, no. We're often seeing the same shops in the same town doing so much different. Is it they have more sales reps, full-time sales reps that can hit the street? Didn't seem to be the case. Are they younger versus older? There was a little bit there, but not a whole lot. And we really tried to boil it down. We decided that there were a few key differences that we could identify. They're mostly behavioral and attitude differences. They really weren't budget, size of company, market you're in, that kind of a thing. It really came down to when we talked to them, they looked at things differently. They approached things differently. And we tried to boil it down to a couple things we could share here today, general enough that we're not revealing anyone's trade secrets, and yet hopefully specific enough that it gives you something to think about and take home with you. Okay? So first thing that we really noticed, and there's 3 things I'm going to talk about here. The first thing we noticed is they all have a very non-traditional sales culture. I mean, gutsy was one word, scrappy was another word. It's hard to put my finger on it, but they operate very differently than you would normally expect. They are the opposite of your typical guys wearing suits, going out making presentations, handing out glossy flyers, and going back to the office and writing up proposals all day, right? That's sort of your old sales model. The more clients you visit, the more proposals you write up, the more business you get at the end of the day. Those are not the guys doing this. In fact, the interesting thing is most of these clients, it's the owner or manager of the shop doing the majority of the sales. That's not to say they don't have salespeople, but they don't rely on them the way that some of our more struggling clients do, where they really think, well, I'm the owner, but I hired a sales guy, and he's a suit, and he's going to go write proposals and bring all kinds of business. Doesn't always work. In fact, very often doesn't. I think there's something in the person who's running the business being very close to their clients that shows up in the results. Another thing is we have a lot of clients who will just call us up and say we tried something crazy. We decided we're going to take our whole plan and go membership based. We're just going to charge a fee and then everything else is going to be free. Crazy idea. Some it worked out for, some it didn't. We had guys a few years ago call us up and say, you know what, we're going to stop charging for virtual planners. We're just going to give them all away for free because we think it will help us grow market share, and we're going to test this idea and see how it works out. That one has largely proved to be very successful. And over the last few years, this is just something that continuously happens, is we'll get reprographers calling up saying, we're just going to try something really strange, really weird, very different. And if it doesn't work out, whatever, we back off and we try something else. Versus, again, your very traditional, linear, suit-wearing types writing proposals, and it's the same type of thing every single day. This is a big one. I know it seems obvious, it seems basic. You want to become an expert in your customer's business, and you probably all feel like you know your customer's business. But I'm talking about going much, much, much deeper. We have reprographers that will call me up and say, Joseph, can you help me prepare for a sales demo? I'm meeting with an architect next week, right? I want to present the plan to them. Can you help me prepare for this, especially a new client? I'll be like, absolutely. I'd like to brainstorm and help you think through it. So tell me about this architect. What are they using today? How are they distributing their files? And what kinds of pain and trouble have they been having with their bid process? I don't know. Look, you're not ready to present. You don't know your customer. I mean, that's sales 101 right there, right? And when we talk to this top 10%, we find them doing some really serious investing in absorbing and learning and becoming experts on their own customer's bid process, especially the bid phase. The rest as well. They're spending a lot of time at the customer's office just absorbing, not pitching. They're going out for rounds of golf and not selling them on anything. They're doing the dinners monthly just to keep that relationship strong. And beyond that, we have a few customers that are now tagging along to the actual bid meeting. I mean, how many reprographers go to the bid openings for their clients? Make yourself useful. Take along a small format printer and be the guy who's there ready to print out stuff at the last minute that someone forgot. Some documentation that, someone needs. Meanwhile, you're there hearing everyone that's involved with that project. You're hearing what kind of obstacles they face in their bid process because you just saw the subcontractor who didn't get the latest addendum and now his bid's being questioned. And you're becoming an expert on that client's business in a way that you now can go back and have a meeting with them a few weeks from them and have a much stronger position for how you can solve their actual problems and their actual pain. The first time we heard of a reprographer go to a bid meeting that they told us about, it was one of those dumb moments. Like, well, of course. I mean, how are you trying to say you have a platform that can help them in their bid process, and yet you're not even familiar enough with the actual problems and pains that take place on bid day? So, yes?
How do you get that? Is that anyone who wants to do open bid? If it's a public bid, don't they just accept the bidders that allow someone else to be there?
Generally, I mean, sometimes they might allow anyone to be there. I mean, usually open means open in that sense. But in the cases I'm referring to specifically, the client, our reprographers, had talked to the owner who was running the bid, the city, the school district, and told them this is a service we're providing, and we're not even going to charge you for it. We'd like to be there. We're going to have a small format copier printer. Anyone who needs stuff, we're on hand. If you open up manila envelopes with bid documents in it and you need to make a few copies, we're going to help you with that. And found ways to make themselves incredibly useful. And next thing you know, they're in the first chair for handling everything from that point forward. Doesn't matter which prime contractors win the bid. Doesn't matter which GC ends up building it. When they're in that position with the owner, particularly public entities, they own it from there on out. It's pretty cool to see. And they have an incredible now understanding of their clients' challenges and problems that oftentimes a planner can help resolve. This is a little bit more vague, but it kind of goes along with what I'm talking about. They find ways to not just be a vendor. If you're making sales presentations and writing proposals, what are you? You're just a vendor. And your clients, who of course are always looking for ways to save money and cut their budget, are looking to cut you out. Right? That's just logical. At some point, if you're a vendor, I'm looking as an architect or a GC to reduce my vendor costs. That sets an adversarial relationship to a certain degree. These reprographers are finding ways, like being useful at a bid meeting, to shift that relationship into more partnership mode. That often looks like working up the food chain towards beyond the GC to the architect to the owner, providing more services for free at that level so that they are now a partner, a useful partner, and then they're making a lot of money as it goes downstream, right, throughout the different bid phases and throughout the different documentation. The reprographers that call us up and say, well, we just work with GCs and we're really struggling. It's like, well, that's why. I mean, that's not always. We have exceptions, again, in this room of people doing really, really well with GCs. But as a general rule, industry-wide, these are the kind of situations where we're seeing people make money. This last one's fun, and this one also caught me off guard. Some of our most successful reprographers are telling me, we walk in now when we do a sales presentation, and the first words of our mouth are, we're here to save you on print costs, which just blows their minds. You're a printer. And it totally changes the whole mood of the meeting. For one thing, If it's a public entity that's paying for deposit sets, that's a huge cost to them. If I can host your plan so people can find them all in one place, if I can charge provide downloads at a nominal fee, which is a fraction of the cost of a deposit set, sometimes that's a lot cheaper for a subcontractor that's going to end up having to pay for those. He's required to get the full set, but if he downloads it, now he can just print out the actual pages he really needs for his particular trade while fulfilling this full set obligation. It's a very common scenario we're seeing. That saves the entity print money, right? They're not paying for nearly as many deposit sets. Meanwhile, your download revenue is going up, much more higher profit margin in there. And at the end of the day, you're growing your market share and actually printing more. The people that are walking in the door and saying, I'm here to save you on print money, end up printing more. Funny how that works. Third thing that we've alluded to now a couple times or talked about is the focus on public sector. And here's why I think. This is what we've been able to gather. First off, the sales pitch is just simpler. When you're going into big construction firms, you're going up against Procore. You're going up against SmartBid. You're going against very complicated systems. And sometimes it's really hard to convince them to use this platform for the bid phase and use the rest of your platform to manage the rest of your construction project. It's doable. We help people think through that and explain to a GC why Procore is not the best tool for distribution to your subcontractors, but it's a little harder selling point. They want to know about your invitation to bid tools, right? They want to know about a lot of different stuff, which is good, which is useful. Do it. I'm not saying die. I'm not saying walk away from GCs. But when you get to the public entities, it just is easier. Sometimes what we hear it's easier is just making some poor person in the front office's life a whole lot easier. Someone at that public entity, at that school district, is spending their whole day running ragged, answering bitter emails and phone calls. Hey, I couldn't find the documents. You sent me the link to Dropbox last week and I misplaced it. Can you send it to me again? Remind me when the bid meeting is. I didn't get to see the latest addendum. Just constant. And when a lot of times our reprographers walk in and say, I'm just here to make your life easier. We put all the information in one place. People can find it day or night, get everything they need, and I'm not even going to charge you for it. I'm just going to make up my costs in the nominal download fee. Sometimes, not always, you just became the best friend, and it was that easy. A lot of times the school districts and cities and counties are looking for bid tools and construction tools. They're just looking for make my life easier managing my bidders during the bid phase, and particularly so that I have a more successful bid day. I mentioned earlier how it can be very hard with GCs because they compete. At some point, they feel like they have to cave to their subcontractors' demands because if they don't, their subs will leave them. That's at least true in some markets. Public entities, what we see over and over again is they seem much more willing to tell their subs, this is the way the game is going to be played. You don't like it? Tough. You need us more than we need you. And that can work so much to your benefit. Because if you make their lives easier, you simplify things for them, and you, especially if you don't charge them for it and you don't put them through a very complicated bureaucratic budget approval process, which as we know is going to be a lot of red tape at a public entity level, they're going to be much more willing now to sell to subcontractors things like, we want to see your name on the plan holders list. If we don't trust that you got the authoritative set of plans. We don't trust that you got the latest addendum. And come bid day, we don't trust that your bid's accurate. That's happening. A lot of public entities are basically giving exclusive control to a reprographer because they believe so much in the value of knowing who their bidders are ahead of bid day and trusting that they got the full set and the authoritative set and the addendum notifications. That's something you can sell. That's something that makes their life significantly easier. That's something that means more accurate bids, fewer bids that have to be thrown in the trash, which might cost them money, or delays, which cost them money. Those are all very compelling for public entities, and it often delivers you authority, not only exclusive control of the project, but the authority to charge for downloads. I just mentioned full set only earlier, but it's another big piece of public sector. GCs often want you to allow onesie, twosie orders, right? Let the sub buy just the electrical files, perhaps. Public sector is all about full set, which is just a beautiful thing for you. Whether it's print or download. You know, even if you do have a GC that allows you to charge for downloads, you're lucky if you can get 50 cents a sheet or $1 a sheet, and you might get a couple bucks here and a couple bucks there. You go to public sector, and suddenly you're full set downloads and print orders across the board. We see there's a little bit of variance, but there seems to be a consolidating around a low flat rate for public sector downloads. 30 to 50 is often what we're seeing. We see people go down as low, as high as 75, but it's often a fraction of the print set. And that's a key here. If your print set is a deposit set and it's going to be $200, $300, and yet the subcontractor can buy it now for 30 or 50, and then just print out the section he needs, assuming he even needs prints at all, that's very attractive to him. Even if in the first scenario it's a deposit set, he could get all his money back, but it's frustrating. He's got to write that check. He's got to go through that. He may not get his money back. Meanwhile, I can spend $50 or $40, get the entire set for free, or get the entire set right now. My name's on the bidder's list, which is a requirement. And now if I do need prints, I just print out the few sheets I need. That's a scenario we see playing out quite a bit. Mentioned that already. So the last thing here that I just want to point out, and this is at the risk of being vague, but I still think it's very important. And we've been kind of alluding to this quite a bit, but our most successful reprographers are not charging for the things that they used to charge for. It sounds counterintuitive, but our most successful reprographers have come to understand that that planning fee is generally peanuts compared to what they can get if they're using it as leverage to get bigger, better things. Does that make sense? 10, 15 years ago, it was pretty standard. We charge a fee to post your project in the plan room. These days, when you're going up against free or free-ish, right, whether it's Dropbox or the competing plan rooms, GradeBeam, iSquareFoot, Blue Book, what have you, it's become necessary, but not just necessary. It's not just a pushed against the wall, I can't charge because I can't, but more of a strategic decision to use the plan room as leverage to get what they really want. Control over distribution, exclusive access to the project, mandating that bidders' names have to be on the plan holder's list, and of course, authorization to charge for downloads. Those things end up making so much more than a $50 project posting fee made 10, 15 years ago. Were you going to say something? Okay. There's been this thing in the industry, and I remember the IRGA, they used to always say this, print shops need to stop giving things away for free. Free is a slippery slope. Free is bad. Free is going to get you in trouble. It's going to bite you. Stop giving away things for free. But I think we really have to qualify that. If you're giving things away for free because you're up against the wall and your client is saying, well, give me this cheaper and give me that for free and I don't want to pay for this, and you feel like you have to constantly do that or make them mad and lose their business, that's a bad place to be, right? That's not a position you want to be in as much as you can help it. But when you're the proactive person walking into a public entity and offering something that they perceive as very valuable for free in order to get something that's much, much, much more valuable to you, that's just good negotiating, right? That's just good leverage. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle a little bit, is when is free bad and when is free very, very specific. And it really comes down to who's in control. Are you using this to get control, and are you in control of the conversation, control of that negotiation? Then free is a very strategic piece. If you're high enough in the food chain, working with the client especially, that's not where the real money's at. The rest of the money, the real money is all the way downstream with every print order and every download from everyone else who has to play by the owner's rules. I just said that. Some of our top clients have been incredibly aggressive in these last 10 years at increasing market share. Incredibly. One of my favorite stories was from a client in not a very big market who decided, after seeing that virtual plan rooms had worked in a few cases, clients liked virtual plan rooms, he decided to go nuts with it. And he called me up and says, I'm ordering 50, just like that. I says, I'm going to take a machine gun to my market. And he says, I'm now looking at a slowly declining print industry, and I want to gobble up as much market share as I possibly can. And I want to box out my competition. And I know that once I own the platform that all their projects are put on, even if they don't have a lot of projects, and he went after small entities, the water and sewer division of a very small township, that kind of a thing. He went after a lot of entities that are doing well if they give him 2 projects a year. And yet he was looking at it very big picture. Rather than trying to go after one client at a time and charging fees, it's going to really set me up to, it's going to be very hard to get their business. I'm going to go, machine gun style, spray my market and just see how much I can gobble up. It was fun because he was just incredibly successful in a relatively small market. And he went after GCs, architects, public entities. He went to his local municipal airports and says, you have drawings in your basement. I'm going to scan them for you and host them privately and securely on a plan room site. And they said, wow, let's do that. He went after the universities. He went after the the local zoo. And he went after types of companies you wouldn't necessarily always think of in an AEC or construction printing type space. And it was really fun to see that work. Not 100%. Many have clients that were like, nah, not good for us. So, he orders 50, came back and canceled 10 or 20, whatever, but was way ahead of the curve. And I know for a fact that his competition has been very, very much boxed out in that situation because they told us so. And while I say him, I'm describing 3 or 4 or 5 different scenarios that have been very similar, where they took that kind of aggression, that appetite for risk that we talked about earlier, and really made a big difference. The last thing here is just the fact that they're always looking for these halo opportunities. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but it's where one service really shines brightly on another adjacent service. I think about one of the classic examples outside this industry is when the iPhone was first released. When was that? 2008, something like that? 2006? Wasn't it 2006? Mac desktop sales went through the roof. Apple had their strongest sales of Apple computers that they had had in many, many, many years, even though they didn't do a whole lot with the computer that year. It was a halo effect, right? People were buying iPhones. Suddenly it turned them on more to Apple computers. And what we see a lot of reprographers doing is just recognizing, again, from a big picture perspective, that sometimes by just getting your foot in the door with whatever it takes, there's just so many halo opportunities from that point on. Things like the municipal airport. If you can get them to use your archive services, guess who's first in line when they do have a new bidding construction project? They may not build very often, but when they do, you're pretty much all set to go if you're already providing them archive services, or vice versa. Closeout services, which a lot of our clients are starting to do. Just a few examples where they're really good at figuring out, I'm just going to get in the door, I'm going to make myself useful, I'm going to become a partner, I'm not even sure how I'm going to make money yet. That's a frequent refrain we hear, as opposed to walking in with a detailed fee structure. A lot of times it's like, I'm not even sure how I'm going to make money with this one yet, but I feel like I have an opportunity to build a relationship, become a partner, and I'm very convinced if I own their account, box out my competition, and control the distribution of their projects, I'm going to be able to make money. And that almost always turns out to be true. And it's pretty cool to see. So if I was to summarize all the points we just talked about, these are kind of how I boil it down. They are very good, these top 10%, at moving from vendor to partner. They do it different ways. I'm not saying there's one silver bullet here. I don't believe in silver bullets. But it's a focus of their sales efforts, and they're very good at figuring out ways to do that. They go extremely aggressive with growing market share. We've talked about how plans on paper are going to continue slowly declining. I don't know anyone who disagrees with that. So if you're not looking just to leave repro, and if you are, great. If you want to leave repro and go color, that's fine. There's a lot of money there too. But if your interest is maintaining repro and even growing repro, aggressive market share growth is something that needs to be at least as part of the discussion for your coming years. Controlling distribution, again, a big picture item, just because it's not always about the fee you can charge today. Get yourself in control of that account and the flow of all their documents. Be the platform that they use. You're going to make money, even if you may not have the fee structure all set up today and be charging them and invoicing them at this very moment. Think more long-term, think more big picture if you plan to stay in the blueprint space. And then the takes risking thing is just fun. Don't be so tied down to formal sales processes and the way you've always done it. Don't be afraid to just go out and try a crazy thing. That's how we see some of the most fun things that we're even going to talk about today panning out with a lot of our clients.